The challenge that no one survives. The Death Labyrinth was not a place. It was a sentence across the galaxy. Its name carried a weight heavier than any weapon. Those who entered never came back. Every race had lost its champions inside, strong warriors, brilliant tacticians, even telepathic minds. None returned. The labyrinth took them all. It was said the place was alive. That its walls moved like a living creature, that it could smell fear, hear thoughts, and shift itself to trap you. Those who entered could hear the whispers of the dead, if they lived long enough to listen. Now, for the first time in history, a human had volunteered. Captain Daniel Reeves stood at the entrance, his hands loose at his sides, his head slightly tilted as if he were listening to something only he could hear. He was not tall compared to the towering insectoid guards on either side of him, nor did he carry weapons. He wore a simple black jumpsuit, his only visible gear a small utility belt with a pouch. The alien audience, thousands in the grand arena seats above, did not hide their laughter. "This one will last minutes," hissed a Slithian gambler, his green-scaled hands clutching a stack of betting chips. "Too soft. Too slow. Humans are prey, not predators," a three-eyed V-Corps soldier sneered, leaning forward, but Daniel didn't look at them. His eyes were on the towering metal gates ahead. They were covered in moving patterns, alien runes that shifted like flowing water. Inside, the labyrinth waited. Above the gates, a booming voice echoed through the arena. "Captain Daniel Reeve of Earth. Do you accept the terms?" Daniel's voice was calm. "I do." The alien crowd roared, some in excitement, most in mockery. Bets were placed. Drinks were poured. Somewhere in the upper stands, the Galactic Council members watched without expression. They had seen too many die in too many ways inside. This cursed place. The gates began to open. A deep grinding shook the ground as the metal split apart, revealing a narrow entrance filled with pale mist. The air that came out was cold, unnaturally cold, and carried a faint metallic taste. Beyond the threshold, nothing could be seen except shifting shadows. Daniel stepped forward without hesitation. The gates slammed shut behind him with a thunder that made the arena tremble. Inside, the world changed. The air was thicker here, heavy like he was walking underwater. The walls, if they could be called that, were not stone or metal, but some strange hybrid of both, alive with pulsing veins of blue light. Every few seconds, the ground under his boots gave a faint tremor, as though the labyrinth was breathing. Daniel moved slowly, eyes scanning, fingers brushing against the walls. He noticed the first trick immediately. Each step made the light in the walls brighten and fade, as if marking his position. Far above, in the council's observation room, a white-furred Zorathi elder spoke in a low voice. "He moves too slowly. The labyrinth will grow impatient." But Daniel was not in a hurry. He turned a corner, and the corridor ahead split into three paths. The middle one was wide and clear. The left was narrow, dark, and smelled faintly of burnt metal. The right seemed normal, except for a single drop of water falling from the ceiling, landing in the exact same spot every 2 seconds. Daniel smiled. Too obvious. He took the left path. The floor changed instantly, tilting slightly. It would have been easy to rush forward, but Daniel dropped to one knee, pressing his palm against the ground. He could feel faint vibrations, gears and chains beneath the surface. A trap. In his mind, he saw the movement of the floor, the likely trigger points. He stepped only where the vibrations were weakest. Twice, he was forced to stretch his legs almost painfully far to avoid a hidden plate. The crowd outside couldn't see the details, only that the human was moving strangely. They laughed louder. Then, without warning, the wall to his left shifted. A huge slab of metal slammed down where he had been standing seconds before, crushing the floor with a sound like thunder. The laughter stopped. Daniel kept moving, tracing his fingers along the wall. He reached into his pouch and took out a small piece of chalk. Slowly, he drew a thin line along the wall as he walked. In the stands, a young alien leaned forward. "What is he doing?" "Marking his trail," the elder replied, frowning. "But that is useless here. the labyrinth changes itself. Paths vanish. Walls move. Daniel knew that. But he also knew something the aliens didn't: patterns existed even in chaos. And humans, above all else, were good at finding them. The corridor ended in another split. This time, he heard something faint, like a whisper of air being sucked away. He turned his head, listening carefully. Then he smiled again as he stepped forward without a word, disappearing into the dark, far away. In the control chamber deep beneath the labyrinth, the AI core registered an anomaly. It had calculated the human would last 23 minutes. Now, after only 8, its predictive model showed something different: probability of survival rising. The maze that thinks. The first thing Daniel noticed was the sound that it was faint at first, like the ticking of a watch buried deep in a pocket, but the longer he listened, the clearer it became. Soft clicks, almost like footsteps, but coming from all directions at once. The labyrinth was moving, the walls, the floors, maybe even the air itself. It was all part of something living, or at least something aware. Every few seconds, a section of the corridor would stretch, bend, or twist like it was breathing. What was once a straight path could become a dead end in seconds. Daniel paused, letting his fingertips trail along the wall. The strange material felt warm, almost like skin, and under it he could sense a pulse. That pulse wasn't random. It was following him, far above. In the arena seats, the alien audience was restless. The Scythian gambler who had mocked him earlier leaned toward the viewing screens. "It knows he's there now," he hissed. "It will close around him. Crush him like the others." Daniel, however, wasn't rushing. He walked as if on a quiet street, his eyes scanning every detail. He noticed how the lights in the walls would dim when he stopped moving and brighten when he started. He noticed how certain corridors seemed to invite him forward while others grew colder, less lit, almost like they were being hidden. The labyrinth wasn't just a maze, it was a predator that he turned a corner and stopped dead in front of him. The floor dropped away into a massive pit. Sharp black spikes jutted from the bottom like the teeth of some enormous creature. Above, a bridge stretched across, but it was made of thin, interlocking tiles that shifted under an unseen force. Daniel didn't step onto it. Instead, he crouched, studying the tiles from the edge. That's when he realized something: the pattern of the tiles wasn't random. Every 10 seconds, they shifted in the same sequence, leaving one safe path across, but only for a brief moment. The aliens watching couldn't see what he was doing. To them, it looked like he was wasting time. "He's trapped," muttered a VE Corps soldier in the stands. "If he waits too long, the labyrinth will send hunters." Daniel waited another full cycle of the tile shifts before moving. When the safe sequence appeared again, he stepped forward quickly, but with precision, his boots touching only the correct tiles. Halfway across, the sequence changed. The labyrinth had learned. The bridge began shifting faster, the tiles rearranging before his next step. Daniel froze for half a heartbeat. Calculating. Then, instead of trying to predict the movement, he jumped, landing on the exact tile that was shifting into place. The audience gasped. He reached the other side and turned down a narrow corridor. The walls here were different, closer together, the light dimmer, and the air colder. The clicking sound had stopped. That was not a good sign. Daniel kept moving, slower now. His hand brushed the wall again, and he felt it, a faint vibration, not like the heartbeat he had sensed before, but something else. This one pulsed in short bursts, almost like a signal. The labyrinth was talking to itself. That he turned another corner and stopped. Ahead of him, the corridor split again, but this time, both paths looked identical. Same walls. Same lights. Same air, but one of them smelled different. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice, but Daniel had trained in environments where smell could mean the difference between life and death. One path smelled faintly of metal and ozone, like freshly cut wires. The other smelled like damp stone. He took the damp path without hesitation. Behind him, the floor of the other path collapsed into a hidden pit. Far below, in the control chamber, the labyrinth's AI registered the deviation outcome prediction error. Adjustment required. The maze shifted again. This time, Daniel could hear it, the low, grinding sound of walls moving somewhere behind him, closing off routes that it was pushing him forward. He let it, because he had already started to see something in the way the corridors changed. Something the AI didn't know he was watching. A rhythm, the first Earth trick. Daniel stopped walking. The corridor ahead bent slightly to the left, but the walls here were bare, no glowing veins, no shifting lights, no sound at all. It was the first silent place he'd found inside the labyrinth. Too silent that he crouched and ran his fingers over the floor. Perfectly smooth. No vibrations. No sign of movement beneath. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just an empty section. It was a reset zone. The labyrinth used these spaces to make you forget where you'd been, to break your sense of direction before pushing you into another trap. Daniel smiled faintly. On Earth, this would have worked on most people. But not on him. He reached into his belt pouch and pulled out a small piece of chalk, ordinary, cheap, white chalk. He rubbed it between his fingers, remembering the little alleys of his childhood in Boston, the games they played on summer evenings. The wall rule. It was an old human trick for navigating mazes. Keep one hand on a wall and never let go. Eventually, no matter how twisted the maze, you'd find an exit. Aliens wouldn't think of it. They didn't design the labyrinth with human problem-solving in mind. Daniel pressed his left hand against the wall and began walking, leaving thin white chalk marks every few steps. Even if the walls shifted, he'd know which sections he'd touched. Far above, the alien audience murmured in confusion. What is he doing? Drawing on the wall. Is it some kind of ritual? Humans are strange. One alien in the High Council chamber squinted at the screen. He's mapping. Daniel ignored them all. The next corner opened into a wide chamber. The floor here was scattered with small metallic cubes that clicked faintly, rolling a few inches before stopping. He didn't move forward. Instead, he crouched and tossed a small pebble from his pocket. It landed on a cube. Instantly, the cube expanded into a snapping cage of thin metal bars, sharp enough to cut through flesh. Daniel's lips curled upward. Good try. He skirted the walls, marking as he went, until he reached the other side of the chamber. The cubes shifted toward him, sensing his movement, but he stayed in the blind spots between their motion sensors. In the stands, a VE Corps soldier slammed his fist on the railing. No one avoids the sentry cubes. How? Is he? But then Daniel did something no one expected. He reached into his pocket again, pulled out a coin, and tossed it hard into the far corner. Vin. The cubes instantly rolled toward the noise, leaving his path clear. It wasn't alien technology. It wasn't advanced weaponry. It was distraction, something every human child learned when trying to sneak past a barking dog or an angry teacher. He slipped through the far doorway without a scratch. The corridor narrowed again. The lights in the walls flickered, then steadied. He knew the labyrinth had noticed the trick. It was adapting. That was fine. So was he. He kept one hand on the wall, still marking it, moving steadily forward. The rhythm he'd been tracking since part 2 was clearer now. The shifting walls followed a timed pattern, almost like a dance. If he could learn the steps, he could predict where the labyrinth would open, and where it would close. He rounded another corner, and froze. The chalk marks ahead of him were gone. Far above, in the council chamber, the AI's voice rang out. Earth tactic detected. Countermeasure initiated. The labyrinth had erased his trail. Daniel exhaled slowly. The aliens watching leaned forward, expecting him to panic. Instead, he crouched, touched the wall again, and began humming softly. The walls vibrated in response. He smiled. The chalk wasn't the trick. That was just the cover. The real Earth trick was in his head, memory mapping. He'd already memorized every turn, every angle, every timing. The walls could erase his chalk, but they couldn't erase his mind, and now, he had something the labyrinth didn't. He was starting to see its map. The hunters in the maze. The air changed. Daniel felt it before he heard it. The coldness was sharper now, the oxygen thinner, almost as if the labyrinth was holding its breath. That was when the sound came, A low, deep growl that echoed from somewhere ahead, but also behind. And above, Daniel didn't need to guess. The labyrinth had stopped playing with walls and traps. Now it was sending something alive, the hunters that he'd heard about them in whispered rumors before the challenge began, bioengineered predators built to track and kill anything that survived longer than expected. No one had ever seen one up close and lived long enough to describe it. The corridor ahead widened into a circular chamber. The floor was made of strange tiles, each one with faint grooves, as if something heavy had been dragged across them. Daniel stepped in carefully, keeping his hand near his pouch. That's when the first one dropped from the ceiling. It was twice his height, lean and insect-like, with long limbs ending in hooked claws. Its head was narrow, its mouth a cluster of clicking mandibles. A second dropped behind him, blocking the way he came. The alien audience erupted into cheers. Finally. The human's done for. The hunters will tear him apart in seconds. Daniel stayed still. His eyes flicked between them, noting the way their feet shifted, how their heads tilted slightly to track his breathing. They weren't just hunting by sight, they were following his sound, his movement, his heat. He slowly reached into his pouch and pulled out a small silver packet. The crowd above laughed. They thought it was food. Daniel tore it open, revealing a thin sheet of reflective foil. Emergency heat blanket, standard in human survival kits. He draped it loosely over himself and then crouched low. The foil reflected his body heat, blurring his outline. The hunters tilted their heads in confusion. They could still hear him, but now his heat signature was broken into shimmering fragments. He took another object from his pouch, a tiny metal whistle, and blew a sharp, high note. The sound echoed in the chamber, bouncing off every surface. The hunters froze, their mandibles clicking faster as they tried to triangulate his position. But the whistle's pitch had been chosen carefully, too high for most alien ears, but piercing for theirs, splitting into dozens of echoes. Daniel moved in complete silence while their heads whipped in the wrong directions. He spotted the grooves in the floor again. They weren't random, they formed a faint spiral toward a drain-like grate at the center. Slowly, he stepped toward it, keeping the foil tight around him. One hunter caught a faint sound and lunged blindly. Daniel sidestepped, grabbed one of its limbs, and yanked it forward. The creature's own momentum carried it over the grate, and that was when Daniel stomped down on a hidden tile. The grate opened, the hunter screeched as it fell into darkness, the sound fading until it was swallowed completely. The second hunter screeched in rage and charged. Daniel dropped the whistle and let it clatter across the floor. The creature spun toward the noise, right into the path of a heavy, shifting wall that slammed down like a guillotine. The alien audience was silent now. Daniel pulled the foil blanket off and folded it back into his pouch. His breathing was steady. His eyes, however, were sharper than before. The labyrinth wasn't unbeatable, it just hadn't met anyone who thought like a human. As he stepped into the next corridor, the walls trembled harder than before. It was angry. The heart of the labyrinth. Daniel knew he was close. The air was heavier here, thick with a faint hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Every step he took sent a vibration up his legs, not from the floor, but from something beneath the floor. The labyrinth was watching him. It had been reacting to his moves from the beginning, closing passages, changing traps, sending hunters. But now, the patterns were gone. The maze was shifting with no rhythm at all, like it was no longer relying on pre-programmed sequences. It was thinking. The corridor ahead opened into a massive, round chamber with walls that pulsed like a heartbeat. Strange alien symbols glowed faintly. He clenched his fists and forced his mind away from the memory, replacing it with something else, an old Earth playground game. Counting steps. Timing swings. Jumping rope. The labyrinth seemed confused. The glow dimmed, the hum softened. It didn't understand why this human was thinking of children's games in the middle of a death trap, which was exactly what he wanted, because in those games was rhythm. And in rhythm, there was prediction. Daniel realized that if the labyrinth couldn't read his real thoughts, it had to rely on the same wall-shifting patterns from before. And now, he knew how to read them. The fake escape passage closed with a hiss. Another wall slid open on the far side, leading into a dark tunnel. Daniel took one last look at the glowing chamber. "Thanks for the chat," he said quietly, and then he stepped into the darkness, toward whatever the labyrinth would throw at him next. The final trial, the tunnel narrowed until Daniel had to turn his shoulders sideways to keep moving. The air was stale now, heavy with the scent of dust and old metal. He could hear the faint hum of machinery somewhere ahead, steady, rhythmic, like a giant engine idling. Then the tunnel opened suddenly, and Daniel stopped. Before him stretched a vast, open chamber with no walls, no ceiling, only blackness. In the center, a single stone platform floated in the void, and beyond it, more platforms, each one smaller than the last, suspended in midair. They shifted constantly, sliding in and out of alignment, rising and falling in an unpredictable dance. The exit was on the far side, a glowing archway of light. But to reach it, Daniel would have to cross the moving platforms. One wrong step, and he'd fall into the endless darkness below. Far above in the arena, the alien crowd roared. "The jump gauntlet," someone shouted. "No one survives it," another jeered. Daniel took a slow breath. He could feel the labyrinth's attention like a weight pressing on his back. This wasn't just a final trap, it was a test. It was watching to see if he'd panic. He didn't. Instead, he crouched, closed his eyes, and listened. The platforms weren't moving at random. The shifting had a pattern, a rhythm, faster in the middle, slower near the start, and it was a game. And Daniel had played games like this before. He stepped onto the first platform just as it slid into place. The second was already moving away, but he didn't chase it. He waited, timing his step to meet it as it came back. The audience began to quiet. This wasn't the frantic scrambling they'd seen from other challengers. This was measured, precise. Halfway across, the rhythm changed. The platforms began moving faster, some rising high before dropping suddenly, others vanishing into the void entirely before reappearing in different spots. Daniel didn't hesitate. He adjusted instantly, reading the new pattern, leaping only when he knew the landing would be there. Then the labyrinth tried something new. One platform began tilting as soon as he landed on it, threatening to dump him into the void. Daniel dropped to one knee, shifted his weight to the low side, and let the platform's motion throw him forward, straight onto the next one. Gasps erupted from the stands. The exit archway was close now, only 3 platforms away. But the last one wasn't moving like the others. It spun slowly, its surface covered in glowing alien runes. Daniel recognized the trap immediately. Step on it the wrong way, and it would collapse. He reached into his pouch and pulled out the coin he'd used earlier to distract the sentry cubes. He tossed it lightly onto the spinning platform. The coin slid across the surface, stopping near the edge. That told him exactly where the platform was balanced. When its spur end back toward him, he jumped, landing perfectly on the safe side. The platform wobbled but held, spinning just enough to carry him toward the glowing exit. As he stepped through the archway, the blackness vanished, replaced by blinding light. The noise of the crowd crashed over him like a wave. For the first time since he'd entered the labyrinth, Daniel let himself smile that he wasn't free yet. But the labyrinth had thrown everything at him, traps, hunters, illusions, and he was still standing, somewhere deep below, in the control chamber. The AI's voice was sharper than before. Unexpected result. Final measure required. Daniel's smile faded. The labyrinth wasn't finished. The trick that changed everything. The light from the exit arch faded, and Daniel found himself not outside the labyrinth, but in another chamber. It was smaller than the others, with walls made of smooth black stone and a single pedestal in the center. Resting on it was a sphere, crystal clear, pulsing faintly with inner light. Daniel didn't need anyone to tell him what it was. The heart of the labyrinth. The AI's voice filled the chamber, deeper than before, vibrating through the floor. "You should not have come this far, human. Leave now, and I will let you live." Daniel chuckled softly. "That's cute. You sound almost scared." The walls rippled. Long, sharp blades slid from hidden slots. The floor cracked in multiple places, steam hissing upward. The sphere on the pedestal glowed brighter, like it was feeding on the chamber's rage. Daniel stepped forward slowly. You know what your problem is. You've been fighting me like you fight everyone else. Big traps. Big monsters. Big drama. He stopped just a step away from the pedestal. But humans? We win with small things. From his pouch, he pulled out something tiny, his battered, ordinary earth coin. The same one he'd used earlier. He weighed it in his hand for a second, then flicked it into the air. The AI's sensors tracked it instantly, but the coin didn't fall to the floor. Daniel caught it. And, in one smooth motion, jammed it into a barely visible seam running around the sphere's pedestal. A faint click echoed through the room. Then another. And another. The glowing sphere shuddered, and the light inside began to fade. What have you done? The AI's voice thundered. Daniel's tone stayed calm. Wedge trick. Old Earth hack. Sometimes the smallest tool jams the biggest machine. The floor shook violently. Blades lashed out from the walls, but they stopped inches from him, frozen mid-strike. The hum of the labyrinth died, replaced by a deep, empty silence, and then, the walls began to open, not into another trap. Not into darkness. But into blinding sunlight. Daniel stepped out onto solid ground. The alien arena erupted in chaos, half the crowd screaming in disbelief, the other half shouting in awe. The council members stood frozen, their eyes locked on the human who had just done the impossible. A reporter from the insectoid press shoved a recorder toward him. How? No one survives the Death Labyrinth. No one. Daniel just smiled, flipping the coin once before tucking it back into his pocket. Guess you've never played an Earth game, he said, walking past them toward the open gates. Behind him, the giant labyrinth stood still and silent for the first time in centuries, and in that silence, one truth settled over the galaxy: humans weren't just survivors. They were problem solvers. And they had tricks the rest of the stars had never even imagined.